On today's show, the Houston Rockets lose to the Cleveland Cavaliers in overtime. What went wrong with the late game execution in this game? How did the Rockets find themselves at that point to begin with? What was the main reason that they actually lost this game against the Cavaliers? And Jalen and Jabari struggling, but for very different reasons in this game. It's all coming up right here at Locked On Rockets.
This is Mission Control, Houston.
Ignition sequence start.
Throw it up to Jalen Green.
Sengun here in the short row. Oh my, that's the no-look.
Jabari for three and the win. Yeah!
Look at Tari Eason.
Here comes Tari.
No! T-minus 15 seconds. Guidance is internal.
The Houston Rockets select Thompson and Cam Whitmore.
One thing I have never done is not made the playoffs, and so we want to take that step here as well.
6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What's up, and welcome to another edition of Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. As always, I'm your host, Jackson Gatlin, native Houstonian and credentialed media member. I'm also the host of Locked On NBA Mondays. Be sure to follow along on Twitter at JT Gatlin, and the show, of course, at Locked On Rockets, free and available wherever you listen to your podcasts, including YouTube. Now, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code Locked On NBA for $20 off of your first purchase. And as always, thank you so much for making Locked On Rockets part of your day every single day, whether it's on your way to work, on your lunch break, in the gym. Thank you for being an everydayer and making the show part of your day every single day. Joining us now to recap the Houston Rockets 135-130 overtime loss in Cleveland to the Cavaliers is none other than your weekly co-host, the Podfather himself and Rockets Wire editor, Ben DuBose. You can track down on Twitter at Ben DuBose. Ben, this was a hard-fought game, second night of a back-to-back. You still got a bunch of Rockets players who were fighting through flu-like symptoms. Coach Tiago Splitter was out for this game because he's dealing with the flu now, and they unfortunately fall a little bit short in overtime. Let's start right here. What to you was the biggest reason the Rockets lost this game in Cleveland?
So for starters, I'm wearing the Margarita Monday shirt because we definitely need margaritas to get through the aftermath of that. Just a brutal loss. And look, this is a frustrating one. I tend to take more of a silver lining simply because the Rockets fought back. This was a game when they were down 12 midway through the third, and the Cavaliers had buried them underneath an avalanche of threes, that it would have been very easy to say, it's not our night. It's night two of a back-to-back. We're weary. The Cavs are shooting disproportionately well. And similar to last night, how Damian Lillard went for 39 and 11, the Bucks got a friendly whistle, and yet the Rockets never went away and were still within a possession midway through the fourth quarter. The Rockets kept fighting back. And while it really stings to lose a game like that, all you needed was one more Alperen Sengun free throw or a friendlier bounce on that buzzer beater at the end. The fact that the Rockets pushed through it and made this game competitive, despite the Cavaliers having just a real major outlier from a shooting perspective, to me, it's encouraging as long as they don't get too down on themselves. I mean, the biggest thing, and I tweeted back to you once you put out your Locked On Rockets tweet tonight, I think when you look at the Cavaliers making 19 threes at basically 40% on high volume, this is a team that for the year ranks in the bottom 7 of the NBA in makes per game from three-point range and accuracy. They average below 12 makes per game, and they shoot below 35%. So this was just a math formula that if the Rockets execute that well offensively, they should have won that game. It just came at a bad time where the Cavaliers made too many shots.
I agree with you that there are some silver linings from this game. The one very recurring theme with this team this season is their resiliency, right? They fight, they stay in these games, they do not hang their head, they don't
let go of the rope.
Yeah, they could have very easily just done the whole it's second night of a back-to-back, we're tired, we just played a hard-fought game in Milwaukee, all this, and they still fought, and they still were very much in this game up until the final seconds when there was all sorts of mess going on with the officials and the Tari Eason play at the very end, and maybe we were going to have a crazy little comeback. It wasn't. It was a nice little fake comeback at the end of the game in the final seconds. But
end of overtime, that is.
End of overtime. I apologize. You're right. I will say that the three-point shooting, while the Cavs, right, not a great three-point shooting team, I want to. How much of this felt self-inflicted by the Rockets, though? Ime Udoka cited this postgame. The Rockets did a terrible job closing out on shooters in this game, and I feel like for the season, not feel like, they are one of the best teams in the NBA defending the three-point line, right? They do a good job running shooters off the three-point line. How many wide open threes did Max Strus get? Did Sam Merrill get? Did Donovan Mitchell get for just, breaking somebody down, off the dribble? There were a lot of wide open shots that the Cavs got from long distance in this game, and I felt like that was one of the areas the Rockets defense kind of let them down.
To an extent, but I also think this is classic coach speak to where they focus on controllable variables. I think early in the year, there was a lot of data that the Rockets were perhaps a bit lucky with regards to shot luck, that teams were missing more corner threes against them than is normal. And we're talking just uncontested looks. So I think the Rockets were due for something of a regression in that area. And perhaps that's what we saw tonight. Look, you can always nitpick. You can always point to a few threes that, you could have closed out harder on. But honestly, a lot of the Merrill and Max Strus threes were a few feet behind the line. I mean, they were of the 27, 28 foot variety, the type of Ryan Anderson back in the day spacing, to where it's pretty tough to account for that much real estate on the floor, especially when you don't have a real rim protector. And we saw that in overtime, especially as the legs started to go. The Cavaliers really attacked Alperen Sengun on the inside. And it's not so much that he's not trying. It's just, he's not even when he's in peak form, he's not the most explosive guy when it comes to defending the rim. And now, he's gassed after night 2 of a road back-to-back and 5 extra minutes in overtime. If you can't really defend the rim and they can shoot out to 27, 28 feet, there's only so much you can do. Now, I know you want to focus on what you can control, and that's smart coaching by Ime Udoka, but I just think the bigger factor is just hat tip. The thing about the Rockets this season is that we have a much larger sample of good defense than we do good offense. So I still tend to go towards the glass half full side from the last 2 nights, and that it's your defense that's let you down. Your offense has actually been what's allowed you to stay in this game. And I just think that, honestly, it's frustrating in the moment, but when you take a step back, and as long as they don't get too down on themselves, I think the good outweighs the bad here.
7 Rockets in double figures in this game. Some really rough performances, though, from Jaylen Green and Jabari Smith Jr., which we want to highlight a little bit later on. We want to spend some significant amount of time talking about that because I think they struggled, but for very different reasons in this game. So I want to unpack some of that a little bit later on. Thoughts on the late game execution here, the closing lineup that Ime went with. At one point late in the game, I said that Aaron Holiday should probably be back out there. I was thinking clean swap Aaron Holiday for Jalen Green. Ime Udoka opting to go with the Fred VanVleet, Dillon Brooks, Tari Eason, Jeff Green, Sengun closing 5 there at the end of regulation before, bizarrely, putting Jalen Green back in the game in overtime.
I think that probably had to do with mileage, because some of these guys, especially at 37-year-old Jeff Green on night 2 of a back-to-back, you're trying to sort of give him, buy a couple of minutes here and there. I think that's tactically what you were trying to do with inserting Jalen on an off night. And you never know. Jalen's the type of guy who does have fresh legs. So who knows? Maybe he hits a 3 and he goes on one of those benders that you see from time to time. It's unlikely, but it's at least possible. So I think that, I can understand the calculated gamble to start overtime. I thought it was interesting late in regulation that, we saw the Rockets exclusively run through Alperen Sengun. This was another setting where it really felt like, he's the him, so to speak, and you're relying on him to take you home, which generally is smart. He is the best player on the team. If I would nitpick one thing, it's that on a night where Fred VanVleet was incredible, 27 points and 17 assists, and made several big buckets in the fourth quarter. The more I think about the final possession with 7 seconds left, shot clock off, if you were going to play the clock, and I said this on Twitter when I was analyzing, some people saying, should Sengun have attacked Allen more aggressively? And my response was, that's too risky, because if you go down on the block, you can't control the clock. And if you shoot too early and miss, Cleveland calls timeout, they advance the ball, and Donovan Mitchell can hit a walk-off on you. So if you want to control the clock, Sengun's got to face up, which he did, and the shot almost went down. With that said, because that's not exactly his forte, and it's not like you're using Allen's fouls against him, if he's guarding that far away from the basket, he can use his frame to try and contest the shot. I do wonder if perhaps if you're going to play the clock game and just try and get a face-up shot, if you perhaps should have gotten Fred VanVleet involved because he was your hottest shooter at that point in time and has been extremely clutch the last 2 nights. So while I do like that they're leaning on Sengun, this is not Steven Silas era. You can tell that, Sengun is option one in an ideal sense. The more I think about the last 10 seconds, if you're actually trying to hit a walk-off at 0 and your point guard is shooting and distributing the way Fred was tonight, I do wonder if, in hindsight, they might go back to Fred and say, hey, that's our bad. We should have run that possession through you.
But the other silver lining from that is, again, it's that continued confidence that the coaching staff does have in Alperen Sengun to make that play. And again, the shot was, it just rimmed out. The little flamingo shot would have been awesome to be able to talk about an Alperen Sengun, the flamingo game winner.
Jackson, I really thought it was going to go off the backboard and end. I thought it was going in.
I thought he was going to get the shooter's touch on it too.
Yeah, I thought it was too.
And it was interesting how the Rockets and Cavs were going back and forth. Sengun with the 5 fouls, Allen with the 5 fouls. They were both being targeted on opposite ends. And, I really do think that some of the breakdowns we saw late in regulation, as well as there in overtime, came from Sengun having to play with those 5 fouls, not being able to be as aggressive defensively, bodying up to guys. We saw a friggin' layup line in overtime. Right. The Cavaliers just getting to the basket pretty much at will. So I thought the Cavs did a better job of kind of attacking the guy with 5 fouls or going after him than the Rockets did attacking Allen, which is weird because they did a really good job racking up the fouls on Allen, and then they just couldn't get that 6th one. But coming up, we want to get into a little bit of the game flow of this one, just kind of how it felt over the course of this one, some other, observations, things that we picked up from this game, as well as Jaylen Green and Jabari Smith Jr., their struggles in this game, why they struggled and why they struggled for different reasons. We're going to get to all that and so much more here in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. Our partners over at eBay Motors have teamed up with Locked On Fantasy Basketball host Josh Lloyd to bring you some of the best fantasy picks each and every week all season long. Whether you're prepping for a daily draft or scouting the waiver wire, every week we're going to provide you the players that are guaranteed to fit on your roster. So let's see who Josh has picked out for us on this week's eBay's Guaranteed Fit Fantasy Picks of the Week. And the first name we got to talk about on this list is none other than Tari Eason, forward for your Houston Rockets. Josh says still coming off the bench, but it doesn't really matter as Ime Udoka has found minutes for him. He's a strong fantasy value per minute option who becomes useful to everyone as these minutes tick up. And look, that's 100% true. We've seen Ime Udoka steadily increase Tari Eason's minutes as the season has gone along. And the way that it looks is Tari is going to very much be a 25-30 minute per game contributor. He's getting starters level minutes even though he's coming off the bench. So that's a fantastic pick there. Next on the list, Grayson Allen. With Bradley Beal out again, Allen should see strong minutes and a nice increased usage role for the next few weeks. That makes a ton of sense there. Last one on our list, Malachi Branham seems to be a starter for the Spurs for the short term at least, and he has flashed some increased passing skills, increasing his fantasy viability. So a few names for you to check out for your fantasy league today. Now, Josh from Locked On Fantasy Basketball is going to help you win your fantasy championship this season, and eBay Motors knows a championship team is about each player being a perfect fit, the exact same as with your vehicle. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you can make sure your ride stays running smoothly. They've got brake kits, LED headlights, roof racks, bumpers, whatever your car needs, eBay Motors has it. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, it's guaranteed to fit on your ride the first time, every time, or your money back. Plus, at these prices, you're burning rubber, not cash. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. And continuing on here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Some exciting news as Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every single league. Just go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. Now, Ben, when I put, the post-game graphic out there, I usually ask, hey, thoughts on tonight's game, reason for the loss, things like that. And one point that was brought up, I can't give credit because I don't have the reply right in front of me, but if you were this reply, credit to you. Somebody said they could you could blame this game on, second night of a back-to-back, fatigue, dead legs, and I do think some of that played a factor, but I kind of want to push back on that because arguably the Rockets' two best players in this game were two of their oldest elder statesmen, Fred VanVleet and Jeff Green, and they played just fine on the second night of a back-to-back, dead legs and all, whatever you want to call it. So, and this is kind of a point that's going to extend to when we do kind of unpack the issues for Jalen and Jabari, but I don't think you can pin it on dead legs. Like if Fred and Jeff are out there playing their hearts out, playing as hard as they were, diving on the floor for loose balls, that kind of thing, driving hard to the rim, which is Jeff Green's like patented move where he walks the ball up and catches the opposing center by surprise and just drives it in and, kisses it off the glass. If they're playing at the level at which they were playing at in this game, then what's the excuse for the guys who are younger than them? Right?
And I will say that this is the third straight game, all three of this road trip, in which they've gotten off to pretty bad starts, and they've been playing from behind for the majority of the game. They were able to dig their way out against Memphis because that's the worst team of the three. They almost did against Cleveland, which is the median, and they could not against Milwaukee, which is obviously the best of the three. So yeah, that sort of pushes back on the whole dead legs thing too, is that really it's a continuation of what we see in the whole road trip, which is putting yourself behind the 8 ball early. Now I know the Cleveland game, they did take a 9-point lead late in the second quarter, but that was somewhat of an exception to the rule, riding the Jeff Green wave in the first half when he was just out of this world. For the most part,
and then they also gave up that lead because they failed to close the first half well. So
right, yeah, and then they struggled in the third quarter to start, largely with Jalen Green and Jabari Smith Jr. really struggling with some of their defensive rotations, and those are guys that should be the freshest. You mentioned the two veterans, and then also Tari Eason, who's coming off a stress reaction in his leg. That's the very definition of a stress injury. They've been trying to manage his minutes. And yet on night 2 of a road back-to-back in the second half, he's making plays in transition all over the court. He's rejecting Donovan Mitchell on step-back threes, just incredible play. So if Fred and Jeff and Tari Eason coming off the stress reaction all on night 2 of a back-to-back playing both ends can play at that level, why can't some of your younger guys? Yeah, that's absolutely a fair criticism. The only area I would say where I think dead legs may have played a slightly bigger role was in the 5-minute overtime period. And even in that, you could point to, as you did with Sengun, the 5 fouls and say that it's partly that as well. But I did think that the Rockets had to expend so much energy fighting back time after time. It felt like so many times in the fourth quarter, the Cavs would go up 6-7 points and it's like, that's the haymaker, it's over. And the Rockets would have to punch back with, a quick burst. And they had to expend so much energy to fight back. But ultimately what this comes down to is having to fight back so many times. And we saw this 3 games. And in reality, yeah, that's a deeper problem than just, tired legs or the schedule. They're consistently getting off to bad starts. And a big reason for that, of course, is Jalen Green and Jabari Smith Jr. not playing well.
Another positive, at least from this game, as we're kind of sifting through the wreckage of this loss, is that they responded in a big way in the rebounding department, right? After getting crushed on the glass against Milwaukee, they come back, they respond 47-37 rebounding advantage. And we saw yet another, Ime Udoka has these interesting defensive schemes where in this game, Alperen Sengun was matched up with Isaac Okoro a lot in this game, mainly because, and the reason for that, if you're watching this game, you're like, why is Alp guarding a wing player? The reason the Rockets do that is they want to take Sengun out of the pick and rolls with Jarrett Allen, Donovan Mitchell, whoever else, whatever guard has the ball for the Cavaliers. They want to actively be able to switch those pick and rolls because they are confident in their wing defender's ability, whether it's Tari, whether it's Jabari, Dillon. They're fine with that guy, any of those guys guarding Jarrett Allen and kind of holding their own on the low block because Allen doesn't have a post bag, right? So I did think I was encouraged by the way that the Rockets kind of handled that, and then their kind of their commitment to kind of gang rebounding at times when you had, 2 smaller guys kind of swarming Jarrett Allen, boxing him out, trying to keep him off the glass. There were some moments where Isaac Okoro got the better of Alperen Sengun, like on a drive here or there. But by and large, 11 points, only 4 of 7 shooting. Like that wasn't like an issue in the game at all.
No,
it's not
like
Isaac Okoro cooked Sengun in that matchup. He held his own.
No, and it allowed Sengun to freelance a bit as well and help as he might need to cut off some of those drives. Now, some of the rotations that did lead to open threes, but again, as we were saying earlier, you have to give up something. There's no perfect defense, especially when you're a bit limited with rim protection the way the Rockets are. So all in all, I didn't have a problem with the scheme. One note defensively that I was really encouraged by, on my podcast at Loggerline last week, I talked about how seeing Tari finish in place of Jaylen was so encouraging from the standpoint of Tari, because it shows you that the coaching staff believes in his ability to play not just as a forward, but as a wing. And if he can play from 2 through 4, there's so much more flexibility that you have with your ability to close using Tari Eason. If it was like last season where he was primarily a forward, a front court player, it was always a little tricky because, yeah, Tari played really well, but are you going to want to close with him ahead of Alperen Sengun, who's your 5 of the future? Are you going to close with him ahead of Jabari Smith Jr., who's your 4 of the future? If not, then where exactly does he fit in? Well, now that Tari is shooting well enough and agile enough on the perimeter defensively, we saw what he did against Donovan Mitchell. I thought he just did an incredible job one-on-one whenever he could avoid the switch. Then it just gives the Rockets so many options. We saw down the stretch of the game, it was Tari in place of Jabari, who did not have a good night. I know we'll get into that. But then in overtime, you slotted or when was it? No. Overtime, Jaylen came back in, and so you slid Tari to the front court. Before that, you had Tari in place of Jaylen, and you had Jeff Green in the front court alongside Alperen Sengun.
It is worth noting that lineup that you're referencing, the end of regulation lineup: Fred, Dillon, Tari, Jeff, Alp. It's worth noting Dillon does have the lineup versatility where he's got the skill set.
He's got the sand in his pants.
Guard, right? Like
he's got both the sand in his pants and the wing defense. So yeah, Dillon is super versatile, but I would put Tari in that box as well. I would say that they are both guys that can defend near the rim and also on the perimeter. So I would just point out that this is a game where the Rockets use Tari in a lot of different ways to make a lineup with Jeff Green work and then a lineup with Jaylen Green work. And so that's something that defensively, I mean, there's no reason to think that Tari couldn't, but it's nice to actually see it play out that way in a high leverage setting, because say what you will about the reasons the Rockets lost this game, I don't think Tari Eason was anywhere near the top of the list.
Look, the NBA has largely become a positionless league over these last 5-10 years, and I think you can boil it down to 3 kind of primary roles on the floor. You've got your ball handlers, you've got your wings, and you've got your bigs. And I think there's a lot of merit to these lineups that the Rockets sometimes run, where they've got one ball handler out there, so Fred, Jaylen, whoever you want to pick, Aaron Holiday maybe, then 3 wing players who are all very switchable, who provide a lot of size, rebounding, defense, everything, and take your pick of all the wings the Rockets have across the roster, and then you leave one big out there. And sometimes that big is Jeff Green, who is effectively kind of a wing, and then other times it's Alp or some, seemingly Jock Landale as of late, who's soaking up some minutes while guys are, in and out of the rotation due to this flu bug, painfully soaking up the minutes. You know what? We don't want to talk about the Jock Landale minutes. Look, you know what? I will say this. Watching Tristan Thompson in like the 18 minutes that he played. Look, first off, when I looked at the box score, I would have thought Tristan Thompson would have had like 8 rebounds, because it felt like he had a presence when he was on the floor. It felt like he was just, guys were bouncing off of him left and right. He was, in the paint, causing havoc. And it's like, that's kind of what I wanted Jock Landale to be for this Rockets team, right? Just come in and be a bruiser and make your presence felt. It doesn't have to be pretty. Set hard screens, get some extra possessions with some rebounds, close out defensive possessions strong. And so, hey, go get Tristan Thompson, Rafael Stone. Go get him, because that's
someone that
Jock
can
Landale
rebound.
should have been.
I mean, Jock Landale is just, he has 0 burst. He has 0 explosion. There was a play at the end of the first quarter that drove me nuts when the Rockets were up 6, and it felt like, okay, they're finally going to get some separation. And then it quickly went the other direction. There was a point blank rebound that was going right to Jock, but his vertical was about maybe 2 inches. And I forget who it was, but somebody tipped it out instead. The Cavaliers got a 3. Next thing you know, they take the lead at the beginning of the second quarter, and they lead most of the game from that point forward. It's just, it's so frustrating. I do think some of it's medically related with the ankle injury in the offseason, but boy, it's just a struggle. A defensive guy who's not that big, who can't really leave his feet for rebounds, and doesn't get much separation on his layup attempts near the rim. Obviously, it's not a lob threat. So what are you supposed to do?
Lob threat.
I had to go find the button. Sorry, that was very important to me.
I figured that's what the pause was for. I knew I set you up.
Look at that. That's chemistry right there, Ben. That's a little.
Where is Bruno Fernando when you need him?
Oh man, I do not have a Bruno line anywhere on the board, but
I actually would take Bruno over Jock Landale, but that's neither here nor there.
Honestly, probably yeah. That's the sad state of affairs that we've got with the backup center situation with this current team. But coming up, we want to get into final thoughts from this game. We got to talk about Jaylen Green, Jabari Smith Jr., who both struggled in big ways in this game, but for very different reasons. We're going to get to that in just one moment. First, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Look, you shouldn't have to worry the next time you're trying to go out and have a good time, whether it's a concert, a sporting event, maybe it's a play. Getting tickets doesn't have to be a stressful experience. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events happening near you. They've got killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive at the venue, plus their best price guarantee. Look, Game Time is the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. You've got the all-in prices. We've all been there. You start filling out all your ticket information, you get to the checkout, and then suddenly the cost is like double what you thought it was going to be because they tack on convenience fees and handling fees and all this stuff. There is no handling fee. It's a digital ticket, right? Game Time doesn't do any of that. They've got their all-in price. They show you exactly what the price is up front. You don't get surprised at the end of the checkout process. They are obsessed with finding you ways to help save you money on tickets. They've got so many different last-minute tickets deals, zone deals, all sorts of things that you want to be able to take advantage of. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off of your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNBA. That's LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off of your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. And final segment here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball. Now, two of the pretty big reasons the Rockets struggled at points in this game, Jalen Green and Jabari Smith Jr. And I want to say, I feel like they struggled for very different reasons here, Ben. Jabari Smith Jr. finishing the night with just, 23 minutes played? That might be like a season low for him, potentially.
Didn't play in the fourth quarter or overtime?
Didn't play for more than half of the third quarter. He was subbed out with 7.5 to go in the third quarter. Ime Udoka leaning heavily on Tari Eason, the energy that he provided, the way that he just makes things happen on the court. And let's face it, Jabari was struggling. Jabari did not have it in this game. He was just 2 of 7 shooting, only 1 of 4 from downtown. He had 7 rebounds, but he had some mistakes defensively, some missed assignments, especially there at the top of the third quarter that was driving Ime Udoka insane, that allowed the Cavaliers to go on some of that big run to start the second half. My thing with Jabari is we've seen him execute. We've seen him take strides as a defender. I already said there's no excuse for him being a young guy. Like, it can't blame the dead legs or whatever. I do think there has been a tendency at times for players on this roster when they feel uninvolved offensively or when the offense isn't flowing, that sometimes they check out a little bit mentally on the defensive end. And for Jabari, he's a guy that we've seen just how good it can look when he is involved offensively. And I feel like he's still trying to find his spot on this team offensively because the Fred VanVleet, Alperen Sengun 2-man game, that's been their bread and butter. Jaylen gets ample amounts of reps. And then there's, oftentimes guys, are just ahead of him in the pecking order, only 7 shot attempts on the night. And I just felt like, coming off a set of games where it felt like he was actually pretty decent, a stretch of games where he's been able to be effective from the mid-range. We've seen him kind of helping anchor some of those second units situationally. I felt like his offensive involvement kind of bled into his commitment on the defensive, which it's not acceptable, but I think that's kind of what happened.
Perhaps. I think that's reasonable. By the way, on Fred VanVleet, one thing I want to quickly get in. So if you follow NBA Twitter at all, James Harden had an absolutely monster night. And it would be so easy. And we see this from time to time from a small segment of the Rocket social media community to what if, should they have gone after James Harden at all? On a night that James was this damn good, nobody's saying it because Fred was phenomenal. Just controlled that game with shot making, with distribution, 27 and 17, just an incredible game. So on the same night that James absolutely went off, for Fred to answer. I know they're not playing head-to-head, but it just shows you how good that Fred VanVleet signing is. We're not giving him his due because, of course, the Rockets lost the game, so disproportionately, we're going to be focusing a little bit more on what went wrong than what went right. That's just how these recaps go. But the reality, Fred played a phenomenal game, and he played a role in Alperen Sengun having a nice night with 24 and 8.
And on that note about Fred, he is your Locked On Rockets player of the game. Sorry, sometimes we kind of glide past the LOR player of the game in these losses because we're focused on why the team lost, and it's harder to celebrate the player of the game. But Fred was fantastic. You're absolutely right.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he tried to will them back in the fourth quarter. And with one more Alperen Sengun free throw or a better bounce on that one-legged game winner at the buzzer, attempted game winner, that is, that we're celebrating, well, certainly Sengun, but in a macro sense, we're talking about Fred as the guy who just did not want to let them lose, even on night 2 of a difficult road back-to-back against playoff teams.
With the shiner, too. He's still sporting a battle scar from Milwaukee.
Imagine that. And I enjoyed how he was poking the officials after the game by, of course, pointing out, we all know what happened with Dillon and Ime and the refs, and saying, hey, look at me, man. Why didn't I get a review? That's whatever. That's past history. Let's focus on Cleveland. Look, as far as Jabari, I think in a micro sense, you're spot on. At least potentially, it makes a lot of sense. In the macro, the last week or so, I've been making the case that the biggest reason for optimism with the Rockets relative to their start was Tari Eason. Not just the fact that he was coming on, but when you look back at their run in November and you consider the first 2 weeks of the season, he didn't play at all. And then for the month of November, he was averaging under 20 minutes per game because they were slowly building him back up after the stress reaction. So if Tari is this good, and I believe he is, then he's only been like a true 25 to 30 minutes per game player for the last couple of weeks. So you're going to be able to scale him up and get him into, as good as you've been without Tari or with a very limited version. Just imagine what you can do with him. The case for pessimism, I never bought into the gaudy shooting numbers that Jabari had being legitimate on a sustained basis until he gets stronger. Because when you actually look at the shot profile to sustain what he was at until a week or so ago, when he was shooting 50-something% overall, mid to upper 30s from 3. True shooting percentage was above 60 for a while. When you actually look at the shot quality, I know he's a good shooter, but if you're not really getting easy looks on a regular basis, and he just doesn't have the strength, and he's also not a lob threat. I know I'm going to say that again, but
lob threat.
There we go. It's tough when you're that young, and of course he's still trying to, he's coming off a rookie year in which he disappointed as a shooter and clearly struggled with the longer three-point line relative to what he had at college when he was a marksman at Auburn. You typically don't flip the switch and just over the span of a few months go from clearly below average to elite. It's a stepping stone. And I think Jabari is clearly better than he was a year ago. But to sustain the hot start he had from a shooting perspective, that's just not realistic, in my opinion, at 20 years old and with where he was a year ago. So until he gets easier looks and doesn't have the body for that yet, in my opinion, he was always due for a little bit of a regression. And this is just, in my opinion, that hot start evening out a little bit.
And I feel like he's been deployed kind of wrong throughout most of his NBA career, where he's not just somebody that you want to park at the three-point line and say, knock down the open threes. He's very much a rhythm guy, right? He needs to feel the ball in his hands. You need to get him a couple, elbow touches, let him face up, let him get to his post turnaround, or have him curling off a screen, and just catch and shoot right there at the elbow. Let him get some of those mid-range looks. We've seen him basically become almost automatic when he does get those looks early in the game. And then those are the looks that kind of get him going over the course of the night, where he has some of those stronger offensive performances. So I would like to see maybe a bit more of an effort made from the Rockets coaching staff to get him going early, because I do think he's a guy that you can go to in a late game situation like they needed tonight when they needed a game-winning bucket. Obviously, Jabari played bad and he wasn't going to be in that lineup, but if you get him going early, I think you get a very different player out of Jabari Smith Jr., a more engaged player, more locked in, better on both ends of the basketball. So that brings us to Jaylen Green, though, who continues the trend of being a two-guard, a shooting guard who can't shoot the basketball, unfortunately. 12 points, 2 of 12 shooting, 1 of 4 from downtown. He did get to the free throw line and had 7 attempts at the line. And I really liked, he had a stretch at the end of the first quarter that I was very encouraged by, where the Rockets actually managed to close out that quarter relatively well. Jalen Green got to the line 4 times, hit all 4 of them. He hit Aaron Holiday for an assist for a 3-pointer. He had a good defensive rebound where he tipped the ball ahead to a teammate, got credited with the defensive board there. And it was, I don't know who was trying to contest him for the rebound, but it was a nice hustle play from him. I liked the energy. I liked what we were seeing out of Jalen, but I don't know what it is, about his game at this point, but the wild inconsistencies are just, you can point to pretty much every other player who played in this game, not named Tate or Landale or Jabari, and everybody else played better than Jalen in tonight's game. Yeah. And they would have been better served to have pretty much anybody else out on the floor in overtime other than Jaylen. That's why it was such a peculiar decision by Ime Udoka to go back to Jaylen Green when he had Aaron Holiday, who had been on the bench, who was playing phenomenal. I know you mentioned, right, the rest component being a factor for why Jeff Green probably didn't close out this game in overtime, but I don't know. At this point, like, the Rockets, they've routinely needed alternatives to Jaylen Green. He's been benched a lot. He's missing chunks of games, and there are players that are playing better than him on a pretty consistent basis elsewhere on this roster.
Yeah, there are. To me, there's a big difference between Jalen and Jabari Struggles. With Jabari, to me, he's right on course when it comes to the blueprint. Are there tactically some things from game to game that they could do to perhaps get him going more? Sure. But I think in the big picture, he's generally taking the shots that he should take. He's finding his spots on the floor. I think there's a development process with his body, especially when it comes to the longer shots from three-point range, especially above the break, that's going to take a little more development than just a few months to get from where he was as a rookie to where we want him to be. I know some people compare him to Keegan Murray, who had 12 threes the other night. Keep in mind, Keegan Murray has 3 years of advanced skills on Jabari. So even though they're the same draft class, when the age is 3 years different, that's huge when it comes to developing your body. And so with Jabari, I'm not that concerned about the blueprint. We've for a while sort of seen what his role is, and I think he's building towards that. Time will tell if he achieves, all of those skills, the talents that we see, but I can see what the path is, and it feels like he's generally on the right track, even if he was due for something of a regression, as I was laying out earlier, when you look at his shot profile and the previous shooting numbers probably being a little bit unsustainable in year 2. With Jalen, what concerns me so much, it's like he needs to go back to basics. I'm just stunned at year 3. Some of the simple fundamentals, the inability to finish near the rim, the wide open threes that are nowhere close. You can see from time to time, I think his processing has improved. He's put a ton of time, I've heard, in the film room, and so he works on, trying to read coverages. It's almost like, did you do too much too soon? Because he's not doing the simple things. He's not, and maybe, I don't know if he needs to put on more weight. I don't know if it's just he needs to, practice finishing through contact. But these shots that he misses near the rim, he does the hard part. He splits the defense. He gets right to the cup. He does, I would say 90%, and the hard 90% of what the job is. And he just can't finish. He can't do the easy thing.
He's running out of talent right at the rim. The old Mike D'Antoni.
It's like watching Corey Brewer, and it's just insane because this was, his first year. He was actually a lot better at this, I felt like, especially when you go back and watch the second half of year 1. I know the start was a little rough, but like when he was on that 30-point streak near the end of the season, it felt like the light bulb was really coming on. And since then, again, I think his processing has improved. I think from time to time, does he make poor decisions? Sure. I think a lot of that just comes from, the momentum of a game. When things don't go his way, does he get discouraged a little bit? Absolutely. That's true of most young players. But I just think like the bigger concern isn't just, the fact that he gets discouraged on a given night and is a momentum player, because that's true of a lot of young guys. It's just the fundamentals are glaring. He does so many of the hard things and can't do the final 10%, which for a guy of his athletic gifts and his scouted potential, this was not the Rockets. It's not like the Rockets drafted him at 2 out of nowhere and stunned the NBA world. No, everyone saw him as a top 2, top 3 pick. People loved his game and thought it would translate based on that G League film. So it's a very weird case. I don't know what to make of it. Like I said, the easiest explanation I can come up with is that maybe they focus too much on the hard stuff, too much on, trying to read coverages and, study how you want to attack, and not enough on just the physical development of what do you do when you actually have that advantage? Can you finish through a little bit of contact at an awkward angle? Can you make an open shot if somebody sags off to try and take away that driving lane? It's just a very weird case. And
look, my whole thing with Jalen, man, is I think this is a perfect indictment of the mess that the Rockets put Jalen and Alpi through their first 2 years in the league, right? Because now you're at a point where the Rockets timeline, they want to be winning games now. The goal for this team and for Ime Udoka and for the organization now is to win games, to be in phase 2 of the rebuild and all this. And I don't know if Jalen's ready for that phase, because he spent the first 2 years of his career just rolling the ball out and kind of doing whatever on the floor. There were no expectations. There was no structure. I really don't know what he learned in those first 2 years in the NBA. And now it kind of feels like he's got the structure. He's got the expectations. He's got a coach who can actually teach him how to play the game. And we are seeing some games where it's clicking, where it all comes together and he looks unguardable and incredible. But then we have other games where he's going through those growing pains that you would expect out of a year 1 or year 2 player. And I know that, year 3 isn't like suddenly this magical year where he should be flawless across his game. But now that the Rockets' emphasis is on playing winning basketball and winning games by any means necessary, development at times is being put on the back burner. And that's where you messed up by not being able to capitalize on the 2 years where winning was not a priority whatsoever. And you should have put more emphasis on the structure and the development of the young guys rather than just, okay, we'll just let Silas roll the ball out and do whatever.
Yeah, and year 3 is also when you would like to have some understanding of what the player's long-term potential is, because of course you're going into the summer that you can give them a contract extension. And it's still, for Jalen, projections are all over the map. There's still a case where he can be really, really good. You see the highs, that elite talent is still in there, but the extent of the lows, the maddening inconsistency, you typically don't see it this extreme in year 3. And it is a bit of an indictment on the last 2 years. Now, you can point out that Alperen Sengun is not nearly that extreme, but I think the difference here is that Alperen Sengun had experience as a professional in Europe prior to coming to the NBA. So I don't think the learning curve was quite as steep as it is for Jalen. And look, my thought, I think the Rockets, we heard during the offseason, to go back to all the Fred versus Harden debates, that one of the reasons to go with Fred was that you wanted the optionality of running more offense through Jalen, being able to scale him up. Long term, I think that's still a worthy goal. However, in the short term, I do wonder if, especially when Fred has it going on a night like tonight, if maybe you peel back and you say, you know what, let's trust Fred right now. And Jalen, let's, try to simplify the game for you. Don't worry as much about leading the offense, being the lead guard, and how you attack. Just focus on the fundamentals. Work on finishing through traffic, making the open threes. Less about primary creation responsibility, more about doing the simple things, and then build back up to where you can hopefully have him absorb more lead guard responsibilities. I'm not saying that's the fault of the current Rockets coaching staff. Again, they're in a pretty difficult spot with a guy who developed some bad habits over his first couple of years. I'm just thinking in terms of how you potentially fix this. Because I guess the case for optimism is that, again, I think he's doing a lot of things right. And on paper, the things he's doing wrong, a lot of them are really fixable. That's what's so frustrating. I mean, I've seen some tweets, right? Like, he does still look a little bit undersized and underweight relative to, he's not the 6'6" athlete that a lot of us thought going into the 2021 draft. There are a lot of matchups where he's a little smaller against, but he has the speed, even if he's a little lighter and not quite as tall as you would like at the shooting guard position. He has the speed to still get to the right spots. We saw that several times tonight where he blows by, gets a pretty easy finish for most guys in the NBA, and then he just blows it. And so I don't know. To me, I can't tell you it's what's definitely going to work, but unlike Jabari, where I think, you can get him the ball a little bit more, but I think generally the plan is right in terms of where they're getting him the ball. They know the type of shots he needs. They know his spots on the floor. With Jalen, I almost wonder if you just need to sort of take a step back and say, let's just hit the reset button. Let's just go back to trying to be a competent off-ball guard, do some of the simpler things. Let's rebuild his confidence, get him into something of a rhythm, and then try and scale this thing back up in the second half of the year, if and when he truly, gets back into that guy we saw at times the last 2 years.
Taking it back to the basics might be a good thing for Jaylen Green at this point with the inconsistencies, with the struggles that we've seen. And whenever Amin Thompson heals, first he dealt with, the ankle, then he's dealing with getting the
that
flu.
Would help too.
Yeah, like having Amin Thompson back in the rotation will help a ton, because then you're back to having 2 full-time primary ball handlers in Fred.
Yeah, you have another
Amin,
playmaker.
And that takes the pressure even further off of Jaylen, to where he can truly just focus on that one role and tailor make his mindset to, I've got to be a score first guard, whatever, simple, finish these plays, whatever it needs to be. But we want to know your thoughts on Jaylen Green and Jabari Smith Jr. struggles. Are we on the money here? Are we completely off base? Give us your thoughts on those two guys and their performance, and kind of the thoughts on their seasons as a whole in the YouTube comments. But Ben, the drill. Let everybody know where to track you down at, man.
Yep. Ben DuBose on Twitter/X, the Logger Line on the same, and the Rockets Wire. Also, rocketswire.usatoday.com is the website for all your daily Houston Rockets news coverage.
That's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Rockets. As always, thank you so much for checking out the show. If you haven't done so yet, please consider subscribing wherever you listen to your podcasts, or on YouTube. Just search Locked On Rockets, like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. But as always, thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And we look forward to having you back right here at Locked On Rockets, your daily podcast home for everything Houston Rockets basketball.